Octagon Legacy here with Northern Strike. This is a one-off podcast, but we're just here to talk about UFC London from the weekend. So, Ethan, mate, you know, you're a boxing fan. How do you think the event was as a whole?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the UFC is something that's definitely still growing in the UK. I'd label it as something that's got, obviously, like it's almost at its peak in the US. I think, you know, you've got the emerging fighters out of the UK, you've got your Tom Aspinall, Leon Edwards, etc. I think overall the event felt quite flat. I know it had, you know, the last card in was it Manchester? Was it Manchester?
Manchester, yeah.
You know, there was obviously like timing issues. You know, Leon felt the excuse that like it was too late and that impeded his performance. But yeah, I mean, it felt a bit like it didn't fulfill its potential, which, you know, might reflect badly on like events happening in the UK in the future. It's not to say like that the talent that our country possesses is like not as good or like could reach the level of the US, but
do you think it was maybe like the card itself? Because for me personally, I don't think it was as great as it used, like it has been. You know, there was no Paddy Pimblett, there was no Tom Aspinall, and they're kind of your two big UK, obviously Leon Edwards, but it's obviously disappointing what happened with him. But do you think maybe a few more stars were missing?
Yeah, I mean, it felt like there was more stars in the crowd than in the actual in the octagon, but that's to say, like, you know, it's similar in boxing. Like it's hard to make, you know, sort of the desirable fights happen. There's a lot of negotiations, there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of money involved. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's there's been some stacked cards in the UFC in the past, and there's no doubt that, you know, we could make one just as good in the UK if we were to like include Pimblett, Aspinall, Edwards on the same card. I think it'd be really up there. Yeah.
I think like you said, you know, the atmosphere was poor, but you know, some people that maybe just tuned in on the main card will pick up that it was poor, but you can't really blame them. No knockouts. There was 9 decisions, I think, and 4 submissions. Submissions are fine. We'll take them, but no knockouts on a you know, a UFC London. It's an English crowd. They want it. You know, when a fight happens, as much as we love the grappling aspect, the jiu-jitsu, all of that, you want to see a knockout really, and the fans didn't get that. So you can't really blame them too much for the atmosphere, can you?
I think that is quite a divide in especially between boxing and UFC. You know, there's sort of that aspect of like, you know, UFC seems like more of a real fight, but when it comes down to the sort of the entertainment value, like, you know, Khabib got so much stick for his style of fights, and like, you know, that expectancy of knockouts that you're talking about, you know, if that doesn't happen, like it does feel quite underwhelming, and obviously like we saw that on Saturday. But it just comes with the territory, really. You know, that's how people fight.
For me, it's more disappointing as well, because it's kind of 2 UK cards in a row now that the atmosphere has been flat. You could make the excuse, you know, it was ridiculous timings. You know, the main event was going on 4 or 5 o'clock, and Leon used that excuse, which, I mean, seemed a bit dodgy, because, you know, he's preparing for that the whole time in camp. But this time, you know, he hasn't got excuses. The fighters don't have excuses. So yeah. And touching on Leon's fight, I mean, 4 rounds, he basically got dominated throughout, didn't he?
Yeah.
It wasn't a great showing, and like you said, you know, you're a boxing fan yourself. For a lot of maybe boxing fans that will, like boxing English fans that will coming over to watch that, and having that kind of example, it's not really a great look, is it?
Yeah, I mean, he was nullified really, and it was, you know, credit to Brady as well, stepping up. You know, he was fighting on UK soil as well. Again, like,
said what he was going to do.
Yeah, exactly. He
said he was going to choke him out, and he did.
I mean, it's a fighter's worst nightmare, especially like, you know, when your opponents give all that talk and he's actually stepped up to the plate and delivered what he's promised. But yeah, I think for Leon, like, he just looked flat. Like something felt flat about him. I know that's been like a lot of talk. I guess he's like not got away with one, but he sort of had, you know, quite strong semi-strong reasoning for his last performance, but I don't think there was any excuses this time round. It was a really poor display, and you know, it just depends how he bounces back from that now.
I mean, there's not really many other talking points about the main card really. The other big one is from an English star, Molly McCann. Obviously, she retired. She hung up the gloves, so like, she gave us a few good moments, didn't she? There was that knockout that went viral, and she ran around outside of the cage with the UFC belt, and she got a bit of stick for that. But you know, it's that's in the past. But like, as a whole, how do you think her career went?
Yeah, I mean, in sport, and like especially combat sports, you know, character's a massive thing. I think she had bags of character. You know, she was close knit with Paddy Pimblett, who, you know, he's got a really like lively personality, and I think, you know, when she did lose a fight, in a post fight interview, she did that was the main talking point, that you know what she's brought to the UFC.
I didn't realise this until actually the other day. She was the first English woman MMA fighter, UFC fighter. I didn't even know that. So that just shows, like, you know, that's something in itself to be proud of. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you know, she was off the back of quite a few consecutive losses in the last bouts. To be fair to her, like, before the fight actually started, she looked really up for it. Like, I know she was like in her corner, you know, sort of like gearing herself up, like screaming at her. Like, she really, like, you could tell that she really wanted that.
She was pumped up. I think it was just the difference, really, wasn't it? The difference in talent. Yeah. We'll speak about boxing now. So, what are kind of the main differences? Obviously, watching boxing, people speak about like clinching in boxing, and like obviously there's a grappling aspect in the UFC, and not many UK fans or combat sports fans or boxing fans in general have really transitioned over to the UFC yet. So from like their point of view, people who are watching, like, what do you think their kind of main takeaway was, and what can you say to them to kind of show that it is better than what they've seen on the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the clinching and stuff, I think what boxing fans need to remember is, you know, in UFC the fights can develop in like so many different ways, whereas in boxing it's sort of like uniform. You know, you've got to keep your distance, you've got to have range. Coming in for the clinch is like always separated, whereas like UFC you can stay in that clinch for the whole fight. So I think, like, I know there is a divide between the two sports. You know, there's a lot of arguments, like, sort of like talking about, you know, the realness aspect of combat sports, but I think that's quite a naive, you know, view to take. Fighting can take in so many different forms, and, you know, I know a lot of the UFC fan base say like their sport encompasses all of that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with just focusing on one aspect of fighting. Again, like that expectancy of knockouts, you know, I think a lot of like boxing purists still say, well, boxing, like, either you lose on decision or you get knocked out. You know, UFC you can lose, you know, decision, submission, knockout, etc. So
you got knees, elbows.
Yeah, exactly. You've got it all.
From clinch, like, you can throw these knees and elbows, whereas obviously boxing, it is just fists. But, you know, there's also like the referees telling, you know, because in boxing there's a lot of controversy about shots to the back of the head. Do you think like there's a refereeing difference? Do you feel like maybe the referees in the UFC are a little bit more stricter? Because there was a few times on the weekend where you seen the referee giving stern warnings. Do you think that's needed more in boxing? Yeah,
I mean, it's the proximity as well, you know. Obviously, like I was saying there, it's important for boxers to understand reach, range, having distance. In UFC you can be getting elbowed, you know, punched from like literally not even like a meter away, like so yeah, I think there's definitely room to you know, to be more disciplined in refereeing, but there's also like difficulty in saying that because a lot of fighters can feel like hard done, like that fight with Robbie Lawler before, you know, visibly he looked like brutally damaged, but he felt in himself, and he seemed in himself that he could have went on to continue that fight, his last fight. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty open for debate, but it's quite a difficult topic to say whether or not there should be.
Yeah, and finally, do you think what do UFC need to do to make UK events better? Because obviously we've had big events, but they've only been in like small arenas like the O2. Now, you know, they're great arenas, but they've only got a capacity of 30,000. Obviously Dana White's very against going against these football stadiums, which could host it, but obviously with the English weather, I think that's why he doesn't do it. But, you know, we see it in boxing, you know, Wembley Stadium. I think there's talks of like, you know, there's been talks of Old Trafford before, the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Is that something that the UFC could look to do in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think boxing's only ahead just because it's been ruined for centuries, you know. UFC's like been like, what is it, like last 25 years it's been about
the early 2000s, basically.
But yeah, I mean, it feels like it's more like something to do with like a passion thing, like the amount of, you know, homegrown boxers like Anthony Joshua's period from, you know, early 2015 to like 20, even like now, like 2019, that sort of period. It feels like the UK will sort of just latch on to like certain big English heavy hitters, so it feels like there's sort of a period like Leon felt like you know, he had it sort of, we're waiting for like these big English UK stars to be in the UFC, but I think that's what it takes. Like there's a lot of like passion in it, and like I think they just want to see a bigger roster.
But you know, not everyone's made that transition yet.
Yeah.
People don't realise how good it is. And you know, there's talks of Tom Aspinall, John Jones. John Jones is arguably the biggest UFC fighter. Everyone knows him, basically. Has everyone heard of him? If Tom Aspinall I think he's from Wigan, goes and does it, then you know people are gonna start knowing, and start paying attention more.